So welcome everybody to this week's webinar, Meet Success. Today's guest panelist is Suneetha, a civil engineer. So welcome there, Suneetha.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation tonight and get some good questions from the audience. Before we start, I'm just going to take you through a couple of housekeeping issues for those people who have not attended a webinar before. Just a quick explanation: if you want to post a question, you have your control panel there and you type where it says type question here, and then you click send or enter and that question will pop up on my extra monitor. Let me just have a look, and I'll read those questions out as the evening goes on. I encourage you all to post questions if you want to ask Suneetha. This will go for a little bit under an hour this evening, and put the questions up anytime and I'll have a look at them and ask them when they're appropriate. If I don't get a chance to get to everybody, we have 51 people attending tonight, so if I don't get a chance to get to everybody, I'll try to email you tomorrow and follow up on any queries that were not answered. Now, the control panel takes up a lot of space. If you want to reduce it, simply click on the arrow in the orange rectangle and it will minimize to the control toolbar as you see on the right. Then if you want to post a question, again click on the arrow and it will expand to the full control panel. So hopefully that's all clear. One other thing, if you want to actually ask a question, at the moment everybody is muted, but if you want to ask a question you can click on the hand signal, that little icon with a hand, and that shows me that you want to say something, and if we have time I'll open that up, open your audio so you can ask a question. Just bear in mind you need to have a microphone, whether that be internal in your computer or on a headset. It has to be working. If it's not working, I'll just move on to the next question. All right, now let's start with a few questions to get an idea of who is out there listening today. So the first question I'm going to launch is, where are you? So, are you in Melbourne, regional Victoria, interstate or overseas? If you could select one of those, and I'll give you a couple of seconds. We have 70% voted, 80, 85, a couple of more seconds, and then I will close it and share so everybody can see the results of that. Okay, just about everyone's voted. I'll close that and share the results. And 63% in Melbourne. Okay, 16% overseas, 21% interstate. Good, no one from regional Victoria, same again last week. All right, so hopefully the 16% of people who are overseas are going to find something particularly useful this evening, and maybe something you can do before you arrive in preparation. Okay, next one. Are you in Australia working in your profession? In Australia, not working in your profession, or overseas and planning to come? This gives us an idea of if there's anybody actually working here. Okay, 90% voted. I might close that off and I'll share that. So as you can see, most people are looking for work in Australia. The 21% of you who are actually working in your profession in Australia, please feel free to give your input as well. It's really useful. You've been through the process and now you have work, as does Suneetha, and we'd like to hear from you as well on any of the questions that are asked. Okay, last one. What is your profession? Let's have a look. Banking, finance, engineering, IT, sciences or other. $60, $70, 80% voted, another couple of sevens, 95, that's everybody. I'll close that and share that with you. We have, as expected, 44% engineering, as is Suneetha, 33% IT. You IT people, the next 2 weeks we'll have IT professionals coming in here to do the webinar, so that should be useful for you. All right, good. Let's hide that. and get rid of the polls, and let's move forward. So back to Suneetha. You still with us, Suneetha? Okay. Let's just start off, Suneetha, by telling us a little bit about what's your job title. Can you tell us that?
Yeah. I'm a civil engineer, but specialized in water and wastewater industry.
Good. Yep.
Yes.
And can you just tell me a little bit about what you do on a daily basis in that role?
Terry, I don't have a daily basis work because my workplace is a little bit different. I'm working in the wastewater treatment plant, which has been already constructed, but when it is testing, they have found a lot of defects, and contractor has refused to rectify those things. As a result, contractor was terminated. So now we are in the process of rectification and commissioning the plant.
Okay.
So in that process, we have to do a lot of technical documentation works, like we have to prepare asset registers and so many health and safety documents, and dealing with contractors and contract supervision work, sometimes design calculations. Those are the types of works.
So quite a bit of variation in your tasks throughout the day, yes?
Not daily basis. Sometimes we are given tasks that sometimes it will take 2-3 days, sometimes it will take 2-3 weeks, like that.
Right, okay. And when did you come to Australia, Suneetha?
I came here in December 2014.
Okay, so a little bit more than a year and a half nearly now, yeah? And what did you know about Australia before you came?
I have heard about Australia as a peaceful country, and it's a multicultural society, and the transport system is good, and education system is good.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And why did you choose Australia?
Terry, for that question, I had no many options because my all good friends and I had some far relatives all are in Australia. So so I had to choose Australia, and Australia is a good country, so I have selected this one.
Okay, good. Excellent. And how did you choose which city to live in? You're in Melbourne now, I should say, so for those people who are interested, how did you choose Melbourne?
In Melbourne, my old friends were here in Melbourne, so I had this. Yes.
And how long did it take you to find work?
It takes almost 1 year to find work experience, and it took work experience went for 3 months. At the end of the work experience, I was offered the job.
Good. We'll come back to the work experience in a moment because I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in how that worked. So before you did the work experience or work placement, did you have any interviews with other companies or organisations?
Really, I didn't have any interviews.
Yep, good.
I didn't get interviews.
Yeah, this is very common, and one of the reasons why people decide to take out a work placement as an option. Okay, so getting back to the work placement, some people go through recruiters, some people apply directly, send expressions of interests to employers. You did an unpaid work placement. Could you just tell people how you organised that?
For the work experience, I have approached only for the employers. I didn't go to the recruiters.
Okay.
I approached through the internet, and I have approached to the employers only.
So did you do that independently or with the support of OBP Australia?
Really, after From 2015 January, I have been applying for jobs, and in August, I think I have joined to the OPP Australia, and under your guidance, I have applied to the work placement. And
Okay.
it did work for me.
Yeah, good. And you actually were employed by that employer, correct?
Yes, at the end of 3 months, I offered the job.
Excellent.
And I was paid even $50 per day during work placement.
Okay, good. That's sort of a bit of an allowance to cover you for some expenses, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so the reason I asked whether you did it independently or with OBP Australia's support is it's very difficult to do that by yourself because there are some things that need to be covered in order for an employer to be willing to take you on placement. And one of the things is insurance. So we take you through the whole process of making sure that you have insurance cover for that period of time because you're not an employee and you're not in a contract of work, so you have to have some other form of insurance for that period of time. Also, the approach that you use when you're contacting employers is completely devised by OBP Australia. So we guide you and we give you the resources to do that. We don't necessarily find the placement for you because we found that employers would rather see you and you be the person who's approaching them rather than having an advocate working on your behalf. So they get to talk to you first of all via email and then by follow-up phone call and interview. And so how would you describe your placement? Was it useful?
You mean during my work placement?
Yes. Did you learn things? What value, apart from actually getting a job, which is the best thing, what else did you find useful about doing a work placement?
Yes, work placement was very useful because most important thing is we can get we can improve the communication skill, and we can study their workplace culture apart from the technical capability. Those are the most important things, I think.
Yeah,
in the workplace.
yeah, and really difficult to learn those things without being in the workplace. So yeah, good answer.
Without actual work placement. Yes.
That's right, yeah. And what advice do you have about seeking a job in Australia? Any other tips for people?
Yes, I think, yes, I think my approach is, I recommend them my approach because they can prepare the resume and they can get it checked by somebody and they can keep applying for about 6 to 8 months. After that, I don't recommend them to keep applying continuously. I recommend them to find an unpaid work experience, and I believe that it will work for anybody.
Yeah, good advice. Particularly if you're not getting interviews, that's a bit of a sign that perhaps you don't have what's required, and maybe what is required in your situation is local experience. So that's some good advice there. Did you have to do a survival job during that first year? And if so, what was it?
Yes, I did. I did really mathematics tutoring.
Oh, okay.
It was very, yes, it was very interesting, and it gives me a very good mental satisfaction. I think anybody can think about it because now in Australia many parents are looking for tutoring for maths, English and science, and it is a very good job. At least we can earn $25 per hour.
That's great. And how did you go about doing that? Was that did you do that independently or did you work for a tutor organisation?
No, I work for independently.
Fantastic.
There are website, Gumtree. I post an ad in the Gumtree, and a lot of calls are coming. So we can freely arrange any time we want, and that is very independent.
Excellent. That's a great idea. And all of you engineers and IT people out there should have excellent maths, so there should be no reason why you can't tutor. And it's more pleasant than, let's say, cleaning or some other jobs that you might have to do. So, yeah, good idea. Can you think of three things, or maybe even one thing, that you learnt in your first year in Australia, either about culture, your industry, or the country? Any lessons learnt?
Lessons I learned about this is a multicultural society, and it's interesting to know about people with different background, and here the people are very interested in sports like that. Yes.
Yeah. So many of you will be coming from countries that perhaps we wouldn't describe as multicultural, at least not to the level that it is in Australia. So yeah, that's often a point people point out. People talk about fitting in. Do you feel like you fit in?
I think it's yes, it is about socializing. I have fitting in already, but I need to improve a little more.
Yeah, it takes
because
time.
I need to educate about sports, and here people are talk about sports and musical shows and holidays and a lot of things. So I need to improve a little bit. Yes.
Yeah. It's football season at the moment, so everybody's talking about football, I guess. But when cricket comes around, it's a good opportunity from everybody from South Asia to pick up on that common cultural thread we have with cricket as a sport. What's been the most difficult aspect of immigration for you, Suneetha?
My story is a little bit different, because I first migrated here back in 2002. In that period, it's not that difficult. I went through the English test, but straight away I got the PR. At first I migrated here in 2002, and we have been here for 3 years, and we got the citizenship, and we get back to Sri Lanka.
Okay, all right. So you came in two waves, basically. Yeah.
Yes, sometimes, twice.
Now, moving on to the interview process. So some people will be getting interviews as we speak. How would you describe the interview process you have experienced? Maybe you haven't really had an interview because you did a placement, but if you have, can you share with us some of that information?
Very really, I didn't have any interview, only for the work placement. That one is very informal one.
That's right.
Yeah.
And when you have that interview for the work placement, usually it's just a formality, and they've already decided they're willing to host you. So it's not actually like a real job interview. So you've been lucky there, Suneetha. You've gone straight in through to the work placement, which is better than an interview, because you don't have to talk about silly questions. You can just do the job, and they can see, how you go. You've already talked a little bit about talking about sport and music and culture here. How does it compare to your country of origin in Sri Lanka? And maybe more about management style or formalities. So what about your relationship with your manager here compared to what it was like in Sri Lanka, and how formal things are?
Yeah, here it's very informal. Everybody is called by names, and we can talk everything with the manager. Even during my work placement, I had so many problems. My daughter was sick and hospitalized, and I was away for many days. So I told everything with my manager, and he understood very well, like that. And also here, safety. Health and safety is very important. It comes first for everything, and also quality assurance is very important here than in our countries.
Yeah, okay. So this is a common thing we're getting, the informal nature of the workplace. Everybody calling themselves by their first name and the preoccupation with health and safety and quality assurance. Yeah, that's great. Um, okay, you've talked about what your colleagues talk about at work, football and so on. Anything else you want to mention there?
Yes, they talk about how they are going to spend holidays and how they spend about the weekends
Yep.
and talk about musical shows and a lot of things.
And are you able to join in the conversation? How are your communication skills at work?
Mm, yeah, when that communication is going on, it's little bit difficult to join in still. Yes, I'm trying to improve that communication skill.
Mm-hmm.
Really, yes.
Okay, I think we've probably talked about Australian culture a little bit. Let's move on. What about the language? I mean, you did talk about communication skills, but just English itself, did you have a problem with understanding the accent or vocabulary, or do you still have that issue at work?
Yes, Terry. Still, I have a little problem with understanding this because different people have different accents here, not only the Australian accents. And I understand that some people also find it difficult sometimes to understand my English also. Still, I need to improve, but it takes some time. Within 1 or 2 weeks or 1 or 2 months, we can't do it. I need to improve.
Yeah, and the important thing is to keep talking. Don't go into your shell and feel like you can't contribute. Just get involved and speak as much as you can. It's a good idea. That's great. Okay. Some people choose to adopt an English name. When I say English name, I mean a name other than the name that you were given. You haven't. How do you feel about that?
I haven't done that, but it's okay if they are comfortable to do it. Because I have met many people, they have changed their names. I think so. I have heard that when they are changed names, sometimes they are easy to get an interview.
Yeah, there's been quite a bit of media publicity about this having an Anglo name and the ability to get a job interview with it. I'm a little bit sceptical about that, but and it probably depends what industry you're looking at and who the employer is. I never tell anybody to change their name. That's a personal decision you have to make, and there are plenty of Mohammeds, Javeds, Suneethas, everything working in Australia, so it's clearly not necessary, but some people choose to do it if they feel more comfortable. Okay, let's move on. We had that question. What do you like most about Australia?
Like Terry, I like most about Australia this education system because children have a lot of avenues to go. Either they can go to the universities or either they can go to the TAFE colleges. In our countries, it's much more difficult to enter into the universities. There's a huge competition and children get more stressed. Here, I think children don't have to be stressed. They have a lot of avenues.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Yep. So do you know anything about football? That people talk about it at work. Do you know anything? Have you got a team?
Still, I don't know about footy, but there's a young engineer in our office, and when I meet him during lunch, I ask about footy.
Great.
Tell me about footy. Then he tried to explain.
So do you have a team that you barrack for or not yet?
So what do you mean, team?
Do you support a team?
no, not yet, not yet.
All right, so you're living in the western suburbs of Melbourne. This is
Yes.
traditionally the home of the Bulldogs. So the Western Bulldogs, if you barrack for the local team, this is your team, the Western Bulldogs, who are doing very well this year. So you might want to give that some thought. I'm a St Kilda supporter, but we're not doing very well this year. Maybe next year. Okay. Before we move on to your actual job, what advice would you give to someone planning to start a new chapter in their life in Australia? So maybe to this 17% of people who are listening tonight who are not here yet, can you give them some advice about perhaps things they could do before they leave Sri Lanka or Pakistan or Qatar or wherever they are?
Yes, Terry, I think they can do a lot of things before they are coming here. First thing is they can improve their English, especially listening skills. They can listen to the foreign news like ABC or BBC, or now we have a lot of resources for that, YouTube and so many things. And research about their industry in Australia, what is the trend in Australia, and what are the jobs opportunities in Australia, like that. And they can even prepare their resume according to the Australian format. They can search through a lot of resources, and then when they come to Australia, they can brush up the resume. And also they can think about the survival job if they have friends in Australia. Because before I come here, even I think about maths tutoring, I get prepared for it. And then they can search about how to become a member of their professional body, and they can apply it before they are coming here. And I also even applied before I came here. And just after I came here, I faced for the interview and I got the membership of Engineers Australia. So after they did everything, once they come here, they are ready to go, I think.
Yeah, great advice. Anything that you can do in preparation is going to be useful, and it will reduce the amount of time that you're unemployed here. So just picking up on two of the things you said, preparation of your documents, so that is your resume and so on, is really important and easy to do before you leave. And also industry knowledge. You suggested to find out more about the jobs that are going and which companies are in your industry. The people who have a good understanding of their industry in Australia are generally the ones who find work more quickly. If you have to wait until you get here and then do all your research, you've really wasted some time that you could have spent while you're in your country of origin doing all of that research. So that's really good advice, Suneetha. Okay, just a little bit about your company. You don't have to say where you work, but what size is your employer? Would you call it small, medium or large?
It's a large company.
Yeah.
There are 4 water companies in Melbourne. It's one of the water company in Melbourne.
Good, large water company, excellent. And what are the challenges in your job? So what are the tough things, the difficult parts of your job?
Very really, in technical terms, I have confidence. I can do technical things. Still, I have the communication is the most challenging thing. And, yeah, that is the most challenging thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. People, they might have a 7 in IELTS or maybe very confident speaking in English, but to operate at a professional level in a workplace is quite demanding, and it's not just listening, it's communicating with people who use slang, who maybe don't speak clearly, and they may not be very sympathetic to the fact that you are having trouble understanding. So that's a really interesting point you raise, and a common one as well. What's the most rewarding aspect of your job, or what do you enjoy doing the most, Suneetha?
Hmm. Terry, I think most rewarding aspect is my project is very specialized area. That is the wastewater treatment, that is with the plant, plant with modern technology. If I work for at least 2-3 years, I will have a good future in Australia. And I also am very interested in that area, so I enjoy the every work I am doing there.
Great. I mean, it's a good industry to be in because it's always going to be in need. So as you acquire more skills, you know, the more in demand you're going to be. So you're in a good position, yeah. Okay, what are the essential skills for your job, and do you see them as changing in the future, and how will you keep up to date?
Essential skills, there's the technical knowledge, and there is we need the computer skills also. And in our company, luckily we are given the training. I already got one training, and whatever we need training, we have to ask for training, and they try to give us the training.
And how's that training delivered? Is it like a separate session that somebody conducts, or is it during the work, or how do they deliver it?
Yeah, during the work, I already got some training. I went to the outside organization for that during the work hours.
So is this training in software or other technology?
Yeah, it's the white card training. Without the white card training, here in Australia, we cannot work in plant in construction works. We
Okay.
are not allowed.
Good. So for those people who don't know, white card is essential to be on any type of construction site. So it's an occupational health and safety requirement, and they gave you that training as part of your job. Is that right?
Yes, yes, yes.
What about software? Have you had to learn new software as part of your job?
New softwares, in my job, still we didn't want to use new softwares, but everyday computer skills like Excel, Word, PowerPoint like that we need. Some Excel work also sometimes I forget, and we have a young engineer, and I go to him and ask for that one. Then we can ask for help from anybody. We have a team. That's a very good team. They help each other. That's very good advice.
Yeah, look, Excel is a really important point to bring up here. It's the foundation for many professions, whether it's accounting, engineering, general administration, any education role. It's a really important software, and it's complex to know how to use it well. So if you have a chance, do you use any in-house software that's been designed just for your company?
Yes, there are many softwares that is in the system.
That's
yes,
right.
We have to learn. As on the job training, we can learn it. It's not that difficult.
Okay.
Like,
Yep.
There are a lot of softwares going on.
Okay, any questions? I encourage you to post if you can. That would be useful, and we can ask Suneetha. Let's move on. We've answered those ones. Okay, the future. You've talked about it being an interesting profession and always learning new things. Where do you hope to be in 5 years?
I'm very interested to become a design engineer because I have been a design engineer in Sri Lanka, so that's my dream really.
Okay, design engineer. Okay, let's move on. We just talked about the need for water and wastewater treatment. How do you see your industry sitting in the economy? Is it growing, shrinking, changing, and how?
Terry, I think it's a very growing industry because water is scarce, as everybody knows, and population is always growing, and so we have to find new technologies to how to cater for the demand. So water and wastewater industry is growing and also challenging, demanding.
Right. And driven by the fact that Australia is a dry country, we don't have a lot of water to waste, and successive governments have been pushing for a massive increase in population, particularly in the cities. So, yeah, it's a good profession to be in then, Suneetha, yes?
Yes, yes.
And what do you wear at work? Do you wear the same attire all the time, or is it different from the office to the site? Just tell us a little bit about what you're expected to wear.
Because it's our one is a site, so we are not supposed to wear that professional suit, but we have to wear trousers and long sleeve shirt, and then when we go to the outside side, we have to wear high visibility jacket and with hard hat and safety shoes like that.
Yep. Okay. And what about the men in the office? Do they wear suits or not?
Sorry?
Do the men at your work, do they wear suit, like a suit and a tie, or?
No. They also wear like that, just a shirt and trouser, and they don't wear the suit.
Okay, good. Now, you haven't had a job interview, but do you think you would wear similar clothes for an interview as an engineer, or what do you think you would wear for an interview?
I went for the interview with my work placement one. I wear the professional suit, that coat and shirt.
Yep.
And the professional suit.
Yep. Okay, now we've got some questions coming through. We might ask a couple. Okay, the first one is from Ramia. So, hi Terry, my name is Ramia. From Melbourne. Question to you. Once we have done our research on our companies and hand over the database concerned persons from the organisation, what is the expected time period for them to respond? That's a really good question. So this is about seeking an unpaid work placement. The way it works through OBP Australia is you send out a request to host, but you don't just send it to one employee, you send it to several. So how long do you have to wait before somebody responds? Suneetha, what was the situation for you?
I have applied for 2 weeks and I have applied for 14 employers. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I got the reply. They immediately replied.
Okay, so a couple of weeks for you.
Yeah, only I think 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah,
okay.
Maximum 3 weeks.
Look, the important thing here is that everybody is different and every profession is different and every employer will be different. So there is no real answer to that, Ramia. It might take 2 weeks. It might be the same day. Sometimes I have had people respond immediately, employers respond immediately. And often they'll contact me, even though, for example, Suneetha has sent out the letter that is drafted by me. They'll contact me to find out more about the arrangement of the placement, about the insurance, and how to proceed. So sometimes it can be 2, 3, 4 weeks. The important thing is that you apply to multiple places and you don't just wait for one person. What happens then is sometimes you can get 2 or 3 people saying, yes, I'm interested. And in that situation, you have some choosing to do. So, yeah. Okay. Okay, Alex has a question. Hi, Hi Suneetha, you spent almost a year trying to get a job independently without OBP Australia support. As I understand, it was not particularly successful. What do you think you did wrong at that time, and what would you have done differently? Brilliant question, Alex. Excellent. You've hit the nail on the head. So in hindsight, Suneetha, what would you have changed?
I can't understand why I didn't have interviews, because my resume is also good, and resume is checked by Terry. But for the work placement, when I applied for the work placement also, I didn't change my resume a lot. The same resume I have used for that role.
So maybe in your situation it was purely a matter of applying for a work placement that changed your situation. Yeah? Well, one of the things many engineers will face is that if you don't have local experience, some employers might be concerned that you're not familiar with Australian building standards and codes, and sometimes a work placement can be very useful for that, depending on what type of engineering we're talking about, of course, here. Yeah, so you were doing the same thing with your resume, but you started to apply for a work placement instead. Is that right?
Yes. The same resume have been used for applying work placement. It did work.
Okay, all right. Raghavendra has a question. Hi Terry and Suneetha. There are many times we keep hearing about a lot of racism in Australia. How is it nowadays, and what was your experience?
What's the question again?
About racism. Have you experienced racism? We know that there are a lot of media reports go overseas, and if there is an incident in Australia that is involving racism, then it's usually portrayed to the whole world. So sometimes people can have a very negative feeling about racism in Australia. What's your experience been, Suneetha?
Terry, I didn't have any experience really. In my workplace also, I never felt like that. Because in my work placement, there are different types of people. Sometimes you don't believe that our project director is from India, and completion manager is from India. And there are so many different people with different background, and I didn't feel anywhere that there's racism.
Yeah, okay.
In my yes.
Look, yours is a common response that people haven't experienced racism. I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist. I think it exists in every country in the world, but you have to remember also that this sells newspapers and it improves television ratings when people hear of stories like this. So the media, governments, they tend to thrive on a bit of fear and sensationalism. So these stories will always hit the news whenever they are around. Okay, Sanam, okay. I'm here in Melbourne and have substantial non-Australian experience. Since the last 3 months have been actively volunteering and have secured some Australian certification too. My concern is that none of this seems to help in my job search. I keep getting stock responses that my applications are unsuccessful, but I'd like to know the reason. Is it okay to ask for some feedback? Do you want to answer that, Suneetha, or do you want me to have a go?
I think you can answer.
Yes, it's certainly okay to ask. If you haven't got an interview, you're unlikely to get much feedback. Remember that employers will be receiving possibly hundreds of applications, so they generally won't give you feedback unless you've had an interview. What you need to do is to get some advice on your applications. So whether you show them to me or to somebody else who does a similar role to me, many organisations offer to draft your resume. Unfortunately, this is only half of the job. What you really need to do is to get some guidance as to what the employer is receiving as part of that job application. If you're not getting interviews with your application, the first thing you need to do is to stop. Something that you're doing is wrong, or something in your application documents is not hitting the target. I'm happy to talk to you individually. Just drop me an email and we can have a discussion about what that thing or things might be. It's great that you're doing volunteer work, Sanam. I don't know how long you've been looking. It can take a little bit longer than some people initially expect, but the first rule is if something is not working, stop doing it. So if you've applied, sometimes people say to me, I've applied for 200 jobs and I haven't got one interview. So I can pretty much guarantee that if you apply for another 200 jobs, you're still not going to get an interview. It's very rare that those 200 recipients are going to all of a sudden see something in your application that is appealing to them. Also, depending on how many direct applications you've made as well. Remember, if you don't have local experience, you're not an attractive prospect to a recruiter. All right, you're seen as a risk in many ways. So it's best if you can apply for directly advertised jobs through employers, companies, and you stand a better chance there. Okay, Ajmi, how to follow up if the employer didn't respond in reasonable time for a work placement request? Well, there's a couple of things here. You can just do a simple email saying, hi Jeff, just wondering if you've had time to read through the proposal I sent last Tuesday. Okay. The bottom line is if they don't answer after the second time, they don't want to know. And there is of no value in pursuing it. So you move on and you look for another employer. Not everybody is going to want to host you on placement. Now, the employers who do, it might fit in with their plans. They may have some opportunities coming up and they may see it as useful. You may hit them at the right time. It could be just good timing and the right person. You can't predict that, and it's no point trying to do it. I should also mention, with the work placement, the way it's done is you approach an employer with a kit that I supply you with, basically, requesting to be hosted on a placement. Now, sometimes that approach email is just the start of a conversation. So, for example, I have a client currently who had sent this out. About probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, I got a call from their HR manager wanting more information, so I explained how the process worked, and they contacted my client and organised a time to chat, to come in for a meeting. So he went in for the meeting. They weren't interested in a placement. Okay? They wanted to employ. So the fact that they had received his request for a work placement purely gave them a CV of somebody who was looking for a job, but they hadn't advertised yet. So what this did for the employer was they could get that person in, meet them, run a formal job interview, and they were happy with their resume and what they said about themselves. It was clear that they had the skills required, and they offered my client a job in this situation. No placement, okay, which is far better than a job. So you've got to realise that if an employer can get a candidate without using a recruiter, they save anywhere between $10,000 and $30,000. Okay, so the employer pays no commission to me. So if Suneetha was offered a job after her placement, that employer pays me $0. So I'm not a recruiter. I have a very different business model, and for that reason, the employers have nothing to lose. They get to try you out, see if you fit in. If you do, they can offer you employment if they have it. So just reiterating there, the approach for a work placement is sometimes just the start of a conversation about what you want to do and what they have available for you. Next one, we have Dayani. I can honestly say after living for 7 years there is no racism, but in many communities I've experienced borderline bullying that came out of insecurity of certain group of people. Yeah, look, this can happen in work placements. I've had several clients over the years who've been subject to bullying. Sometimes bullies know who to pick on. They know to pick on people who are susceptible, maybe who feel like they can't defend themselves. And usually the bully has their own insecurities, and that's why they're doing it. This will happen in any country, I'm sure, and it's not peculiar to Australia. Manik, back to Manik. Thanks, Suneetha, for sharing your experience you have gone through. As a civil engineering perspective, any differences you found in terms of codes and standards? Do you recommend any civil engineering tools or technique need to be upskilled? This is one for you, Suneetha. So codes and standards, any difference between Sri Lanka and Australia?
Yes, standards are a little bit different. Not much, but really not standards. There are many more Australian guidelines. That is different. And here they are very strict. There are many guidelines we have to follow than in Sri Lanka.
So
but I think we have to learn it in the workplace only. No courses or on the job training only we can learn it.
So the work placement gave you the opportunity to get exposure to the standards, yes?
Standards and codes, yes.
Yeah, okay. Back to Raghavendra. When we migrate to Australia, most of us would not have local experience. Then how do we get a job? It is like a deadlock situation. Okay, so you've got two things here. One, you may not need local experience. All right? There are thousands of overseas-born professionals who come to Australia and find work without local experience. It depends on many factors. That's the first thing. The second thing, if you do need it, then it's possible to get through a work placement. This is a brief period of time where you get to be with a company and get some exposure. Just having a local referee on your resume will improve your chances of getting interviews. All right. The other thing is that it's mainly recruiters who will have an issue of your lack of local experience. If you can get to talk to employers, in particular technical people, team leads, head engineers, and not HR and recruiters, the conversation can be more about your technical skills and about your suitability for the job. It's very difficult to have that conversation with a recruiter who is a generalist and perhaps doesn't understand you from a professional perspective. So try to get a little bit deeper and don't just rely on recruiters solely to try to find work. Okay. Raghavendra, how about IT jobs in Australia? Next 2 weeks, Raghavendra, we have 2 IT business analysts who will be coming on. Next week will be Irfan and then Sajid the following week, and you'll be able to ask them specific questions about IT. We've got a couple of minutes. If anybody has any other questions, please post them now. Otherwise, we'll just continue on for the next 5 minutes. Yeah, just a little bit about your employer expectations, Suneetha. Are you clear what your manager wants you to do, and how do you know whether you're doing a good job?
Yes, normally I always ask from the manager what I need to do, and after the works also I ask what is the, and we also have monthly conversations. So during that conversations we can discuss everything with the manager. So we can get a lot of feedback from the manager. Manager also can understand us, and we can ask for the training needs also. And there's no problem really.
Great. So that's done every month. You have a meeting with your line manager. Is that right?
Yes.
Great.
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. So that will vary from organisation to organisation. Sometimes it's done monthly, sometimes in an ongoing way. Sometimes you have half-yearly performance appraisals. They're becoming less and less popular. It's becoming less fashionable now. So I'm thinking that in a couple of years' time, the performance appraisals may not be around, at least not in the with the popularity they have at the moment. Okay, a question from Manuel. Hi, do you consider as important to get the chartered status from the Institute of Engineers?
Yes. I am a chartered engineer. I got the charter. First, I came here back in 2002, and just after I came here, I got the charter. I'm chartered engineer from Engineers Australia.
Great. Engineers Australia is probably the most important professional body for any overseas-born professional. Certainly more than the Australian Computer Society for IT people. CA and CPA are important for accountants, but really Engineers Australia is really important. If you don't have at least recognition from Engineers Australia, you won't be considered a professional engineer. And reaching chartered status is something something worthwhile and something worthwhile to aspire to. Okay, let's move on to the next one. What do you think of when I say job security? We hear a lot about short-term contracts, casual employment. The word permanent is not really used anymore. Sometimes ongoing position is used. What do you think about security, job security, Suneetha?
Yes, job security, still I don't know, but I believe that I can continue my work. Job security, yes, I believe because really I am technically competent to do the jobs. So I think I can believe I can continue the work.
Okay, so you're technically competent, you're good at your job, you're in an industry that is growing and needed, so therefore you would expect to have a reasonable security over the next few years. We'll have one more question. Manjula has asked a question, then we'll wind it up. Just remember that this is recorded and you'll all receive a copy of the recording, a link to the recording. Please forward it to anybody who wasn't able to get here that you think may be interested. Manjula's last question. Terry, when you ask for feedback, they say you're doing a nice job, but sometimes feel sarcastic about it. Is it true? That's a difficult one to answer, not knowing the situation and the people you're talking to, Manjula. I'm presuming you're talking about feedback at work while you're working, not about an application or an interview that you attended. I'd probably have to ask why you feel like they're being sarcastic. It could be possible, maybe they are. Maybe you're misreading it, maybe you're not. That's a really tough one. Suneetha, do you have any comments about that?
No, difficult to answer, yes.
Yeah, probably not possible to answer without a little bit more information, Manjula, but the bottom line is that you need to know what's expected of you, and you need to get some feedback as to whether you're achieving what's required, and hopefully you're getting the support from your employer as well. Okay, we might just whip through a little bit. We talked about Engineers Australia. We've talked about that. Is there one more piece of information, Suneetha, you'd like to give before we finish up? Anything we haven't managed to talk about?
No, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining me, Suneetha, and giving up your Thursday evening to talk to some other overseas-born professionals who I'm hoping found something useful this evening. So thank you.
Thank you. No worries.
Good luck with your job, and hopefully I'll have a chat to you maybe this time next year or later and see that everything's going well.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
And just about next week we have another session. So this is a 15-week series, so each week we'll have a different professional. Next week we have Irfan, who is an IT business analyst who has an interesting story as well. So please join us next week. Don't forget to register and forward the email to anybody else who you think may be interested in joining. That's it for me, and I'll try to follow up on any questions that we didn't get to. I think we got through most of them. So good evening and sleep well, and I'll see you next week. Bye.